Welcome everyone to the season finale of Buffalo Babies, Buffalo Bills maybe next year. I guess we should just talk about Buffalo Babies. I was going to do an EndGame
Yeah.
joke about 22 movies worth of stuff going into this episode, but Buffalo Babies next year. Nope. I don't know. I got nothing. No, it's Buffalo
Almost like we
Bills.
should start the show over, but why bother?
Yeah, I mean we
Right.
haven't right. It's not like we're doing any more of these this season, so let's
Right.
just
I
get
mean,
out of here.
7 seasons in the books. Why start being professional now?
Yeah, right. My name is Frank,
I'm Scott.
I'm Paul.
and welcome to our show. The Not the eve of the draft. Actually, when you listen to this, it'll be either Tuesday night tonight if I post it this quickly, or Wednesday during the day. But we are in the eve-ish of the NFL draft, where the Buffalo Bills will select players to join their team. And we're going to talk about that. Part of our deal is we're going to talk about who the Bills might draft, what their draft strategy might be, what positions they have left to address. We have a little bit of the schedule we're going to talk about. We'll get to your questions and comments. And I also, at Paul's behest, because Paul is the one who usually goes back and looks at these things, compares us to where we were 3 years ago, what we were talking about 3 years ago at draft time, how that all panned out. And I went back and did it can only be described as a complete joy, obviously, to go back and listen to a handful of episodes at draft time last year. And let me tell you, stingy listener who can't wait to laugh at how wrong we are, you were very wrong too. So don't worry about it. Everyone was a fool. But I actually might defend our comments there. But to start with the draft, as I said 3 years ago, Scott is the one most likely to have any, concrete college-based thoughts on the draft, which means I'm going to start with Paul.
Of course.
To just get that out of the way, and then we'll go there. We're here. It's time. Typically we talk about who the Bills will draft early, and in the first round, and then go from there. Feel free to approach that in any way you want. You can talk about position groups. You can talk about specific players. However you want to look at it.
All right. Excellent. I am, as Frank noted, Scott is the expert. So I'm going to leave names out of this because I feel Scott knows the names better than I do. We see certain wide receivers' name all the time, a certain tight end's name all the time, certain tackles' name all the time. So we'll let Scott dive into what he thinks of some of these players and what his thoughts are. I look at it more positionally, and we talked about how the mission accomplished of free agency, and that Brandon Beane has enough depth at each position that if he doesn't draft the exact position we want, we're not going to be going, oh, how can you, disregard that when you have X player there? Sure, they're a little thin at guard. They're thin in some other areas that they want to address. But, how I look at what I do want to see Brandon Beane stick to his strategy and draft the best player available, which really goes to then who I hope would be the best player available, or what position. And in really researching this, the one position, and Scott can tell us if there's anyone worthwhile here who might be available at number 9 or worth trading up for, or who you could trade back for, it'd be great value, is that 3 technique defensive tackle. Remember, we have not talked as much as we should about the actual impact of Kyle Williams retiring from a non-emotional perspective. We've talked about, he's, the bridge to the past. He was a leader during dark days, etc. He was also still a pretty damn good 3 technique defensive tackle at the end, even if he was, past his prime a bit at that point. He was still productive. So now they just have Jordan Phillips in that rotation. So you have Star Lotulelei, who came in and did a good job of at least keeping the run defense solid. I worry they can go back to picking on the Bills defense the same way they did in 2017 if they don't keep that interior line fresh. So that's kind of my hope. And then if that doesn't pan out, the next thing I would want to see, and this will be the last analysis I make before we go to Scott for his more in-depth player analysis, is obviously somewhere on the offensive side of the ball. And I would really like to see it be somewhere on the offensive line. And except for center, I don't care where. Even if Deion Dawkins has a rebound year, and Ty and Seki proves to be a capable starting right tackle, those are probably not long-term solutions. And everyone on the interior line, a guard, the Bills have signed Tennessee Titans starting guard of 4 seasons, which we'll talk about later. There's still no stars in that guard, at the guard position. Ike Botker is a question mark. Wyatt Teller, who's a nominal star, is a question mark. You've got Ducasse, Bodine, and all the guys they signed, Feliciano, Waddle, et cetera, long. So they have a bunch of, them guys, if you will, in there. And what they really could use is a grinder. And when you read most draft analyses, you can get a good guard in the draft and just, train him. Center tackle, a little bit tougher to get a guy who's league ready. But guards, you generally need grinders or guys who can move their feet or whatever you're looking for. So initially, I'm hoping the best player available is a defensive tackle, 3 technique. If not, I hope the best player available is on the offensive line. Third, if not, I hope he's somewhere on the offense. And then fourth, most importantly, just draft the best player you can. So maybe Scott can tell us who some of those best players might be.
Yeah. So the good news is that the Bills are in a decent position at 9 for quality talent that should be able to come in and play right away. So I think if you wanted to go, like, to me, like, best player available is kind of like somewhat, I don't want to say a meaningless term. I think it's more of a, like, is there going to be a rapidly, like, if you really, it's kind of one of these things where you can say, like, oh, well, this was the 10th best guy we had on the board. We picked a 10. He was there, so we took him. And that's it. And that's fine on all well and good. If that guy doesn't see the field for a year or two, and if you were picking at 15, you would have taken somebody else, and that guy would have seen the field sooner, and that guy was the best player available, then to me, it's kind of like, well, I understand that there's a bit of value here, but at the same time, like, you only have these guys locked up for so long, so they kind of need to be able to have a role on the team sooner rather than later. Which, if you're in a rotation or you're behind a guy who's starting, that's locked into a big contract, you're not going to get that kind of value out of the draft picks, which is frankly a critical part of the thing. So getting beyond the best player available, need-based pick, whatever you want to call it. There's definitely plenty of defensive tackles that are good in this year's draft. So there's usually, depending on how you want to call it, 5 or 6 that are probably like first round defensive tackles, guys who can probably come in and be starters right off the bat. I think we're probably going to miss out on Quinnen Williams, who is generally considered the best player in the draft. He is playing defensive tackle is kind of an interesting position where it's been of decreased importance, perhaps a little bit the last couple of years. Obviously, people talk about Nick Bosa, his brother.
We'll get to Joey Bosa later. Yeah.
Josh Allen, who is an edge rusher for Kentucky, who, as I was talking with one of the Jets fans in the office, we were talking about how the Jets are going to draft Josh Allen, and then Josh Allen's going to sack Josh Allen at some point in the season, and the announcers are going to love that. They are already planning. I can imagine Ian Eagle right now thinking of how he's going to explain Josh Allen sacking Josh Allen. But moving on, if we want to focus, so Quinnen Williams probably going to be gone, but then pretty much after that, there's a lot of guys who are in play. It depends. I think you take Jeffrey Simmons, who played an excellent defensive tackle role for Mississippi State, but he was injured in draft prep, so he's probably off the field for this entire season, unless maybe you can activate him kind of that last month of the season into the playoffs. But honestly, you're probably not going to want to keep a roster spot for him. You're probably going to want to put him on IR. So there's a lot of people who are going to pass on him. That's why everyone says he's going to go to the Pats, because the Pats don't care, and they could probably win the Super Bowl without a first-round draft pick this year, so they'll just bring him in next year and he'll kill people. If you want a defensive tackle, I think Ed Oliver is a really good choice. I think he's a guy who's built for a 4-3 scheme, perfect kind of 3 technique, can disrupt, can do okay, can do perfectly fine against the run, super fast, lightning quick kind of reflexes, really good hands, really good feet, great pass rusher. 2 years ago at Houston, he was unbeatable. They were talking about him being a top 10 pick as a junior. Now he's stayed another year. He had a bit of a setback this year, but I still think he's a great player. So if we came out of the draft with Ed Oliver, I wouldn't be disappointed with that. I'd be more disappointed that we didn't take an offensive lineman, because me personally, I think the biggest need is on offensive line. I think there's quality on the offensive line side of the house. So for me, it's kind of a question of exactly what kind of tackle you want. Because to me, again, you take somebody who's played tackle, and then if it doesn't work out, maybe they can play guard. it all worked. It worked out well with Mike Williams. So what could go wrong there?
Mm-hmm.
But basically, if you want to go offensive tackle, there's a couple different kind of prototypes. So
you could try the Jason Peters way of draft a tight end and make him your franchise left tackle.
Exactly. There's plenty of guys like that, I think, probably out there too. Anyway, if you want to take guys who have played tackle, you would go with Jonah Williams. So Jonah Williams is kind of I don't want to say he's not athletic. He is athletic. And these are all kind of shades of great because these are all guys who had first round grades on them in one way, shape, or form. So it's really what kind of system we want to run them in. So Jonah Williams is kind of the technician. He's pretty good at everything. Good run blocker, good pass blocker. He's got the shorter arms. So he's not quite the prototype in terms of being the perfect kind of athlete for the position, but he's probably good enough to be a good tackle. There is a lot of talk about moving him to guard, so I'd be a little concerned about that. But if we ended up with him, I wouldn't be terribly concerned because again, these are supposedly the professionals making these picks. And then the other two that I would think about, so one is Andre Dillard, who I like from Washington State. They say that he's the best pass blocker in the draft, that he's a prototype left tackle. He's got PFF has him number 2 overall and the highest pass protection grade for tackles last year. So he's somebody to me who I want at left tackle watching Josh Allen's rear for the next 5 years. I think that's probably where I would go. Some people have him go mooring in the mid rounds, or not in the mid rounds, but in the middle of the first. So I'd be fine taking him at 9. Maybe you could see if you could trade back a little to try and still have a shot at him. And then the other one that you want to talk about is Jawan Taylor from Florida. I personally am probably a little biased. I don't know why against Florida offensive linemen. I just feel like I've not heard. I feel like I'm
not a Pouncey guy, huh?
Yeah, I mean, he played there, I guess. Yeah, he's been a good center, I guess. But I feel like I can't think of another one. And I'm sure there are. I'm sure all of our Florida fans there are legion on this podcast listening, big Florida Gators fans, will come in and remind me of all the great players they have in the league. But Jawan Taylor is kind of, people pick him a little higher in some of these mock drafts because he is the prototype frame. Like, he is the guy with the long arms. He is the guy who, if you taught him better technique, he would be kind of your prototypical right tackle. They're not quite sure that he's got the quickness to play left, but he probably could in a pinch. I am a little less high on him, so I'd be more of a fan of taking one of the first 2 guys for that reason. So that is enough for me. I think if you're looking at the draft, and we'll get into the guys later, but to me, there is more depth on the defensive tackle side. So I'd be a little more pleased with letting that need wait a little bit to the beginning of the second round. And there's still going to be some value there as we can get to later, rather than trying to find an offensive tackle who might be a project, who we might have to wait a little time to get him on board. Because while we've made some improvements on the line, as Paul's saying, we have a lot of guys who are just guys. So
guys who are guys.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's sort of the song and dance of the last X years. Guys who are guys. Yep. Sorry, it's funny because it's a sad amount of overlap with the 2016 draft. To be honest, okay. This is all very, very good information. And what I'd like to do now, because Scott brought it up a little, the remaining questions in the draft preview that Paul listed, I'll read them all at once. Trade up or down or stay put, positions to address in later rounds, and how to leverage 7 picks after round 2. I think that those questions all kind of go together because it depends on how you're viewing the what happens in the first round. So if you're taking, and you're let's just say you're not that impressed with taking, the 1-year deal that Quentin Spain has, that you still feel like the Bills ought to be drafting a tackle. Well, how do you, Scott sort of says, I want to go offensive tackle in the first round because there's defensive tackles available in round 2, and then we could fill out the rest of the draft. Paul, how does that sound to you? Do you have you given any thought to how you would trade up or down? I know Buffalo Rumblings did an article on trade value.
Yeah, and it's fascinating. And this is probably what I was doing the most, just looking around at in recent years, because in recent weeks, excuse me. One thing that really I was ready to kind of stand on the hill for is like you never get anyone of value in the later rounds. But as I went through it and I saw the Stevie Johnsons and the Kyle Williamses, who was a 5th rounder, and even some of the contributing players that they've gotten in later rounds. Remember, Demetrius Bell was competent for a few seasons with the Bills, and he was a 7th round pick as well. So they have, you can get good value players in there. What has concerned me about though is, and as Frank mentioned, these questions are all tied in. You have 7 picks after round 2. You have 10 picks total. And really, if you want to look at that roster right now, I don't believe there are 10 spots available. I think last year the only draft pick they cut was Austin Prohl, but Ray McLeod was, really not part of the team at all. Like Bodger didn't really suit up much. And they, mind you, last year was a year where they needed bodies. I think you're going to want to reduce the number of picks. And one approach that doesn't get a lot of attention is we all think, how much can you trade up this year? And I would like to see them trade up if they get an offensive. If someone wants to jump in, go right ahead, by the way. But
no, that's good. I just was surprised by your answer. Continue.
Yeah, if someone wants, if you get a good offensive line in the first round, and then you have a chance to get the tight end you want, or the defensive tackle you want, or whatever in the second round, use it. You can use 2 to 3 later round picks, and I'm fine with that, or even mid round picks, a 4th, a 5th, and a 6th, or give your 2nd, a 6th, and a 7th for an extra second round pick, whatever it takes. But one strategy I wanted to point out, which I'm sure the Bills have done it, but which is a hallmark of the Patriots, is in the later rounds, seeing if there's interest in someone moving up in the 4th or 5th round and doing what they called, I think the term might be upseeding. So essentially you say, sure, you can take our 4th round pick this year if you give us your 3rd round pick next year, or if you will give you our 5th round pick this year for your 4th round next year. And that way you're adding value to future drafts. If you're looking at your board of 115 or whatever Brandon Bean said their board is going to end up being, I think it was about 115 based on the article in The Athletic. If you're looking at that board and thinking, we're running pretty low, so let's get as many leverage picks as we can for next season. So all of that's pretty much a way of saying, if you have the players available, I have no problem trading up to 2 mid to late round picks and the corresponding pick of that round. So a 2nd for a 2nd, a 3rd for a 3rd to move up to get the player you want. If that player's not there, I think you start to look for trades whereby you can get better future picks, because I don't think you're going to have 10 players from this draft end up on the Bills roster.
I think that's a really sharp, astute point. I hadn't thought through that, and I think it's 100% like we've signed a bunch of essentially depth guys, and we're going to have them all kind of battle it out, Joker's competition from the Dark Knight style, and one of them gets to stay on the team, and that doesn't leave a lot of room for draft picks, because frankly, the draft picks are in many cases going to be, especially if you're talking guys through the 4th through 7th rounds, they're going to be projects. They're going to be guys who aren't going to be ready for the team right away. And yeah, sure, maybe 1 or 2 of them you can hold on to, but a lot of those guys, if you're bringing them in for depth, the depth is already there, and they're going to be going against established starting pros who maybe not starting in some cases, but guys who have experience in the league and what's expected out of them. It's a tough mission for these guys to come in. So I think I've always thought that there's an interesting theory about whether you should just take every pick from 4th through 7th rounds and then just bundle them together and say, we want to, give us, Cincinnati or whoever, just give us a 2nd round pick in exchange. And
right.
It's one good chance at getting a good starter versus, a 1% chances that you'll get a good starter at it. And there's certainly value in getting guys who are depth and special teams guys, which is again something that you're looking for in those later rounds, at value in terms of your ability to pay them, or the pay that they're going to be slotted in for. But at the same time, I wouldn't overstate the value of those kind of guys, and that there aren't a variety of guys who have played in the league, as we've learned this offseason, who are available for the right price, which is very rarely more than the veteran minimum in many cases. So I would say that. I would say, in terms of how I see briefly how the rest of the draft goes, as I mentioned, I would go offensive lineman first, ideally tackle first, to make sure that we get Josh Allen upright, and then we have at least 2.5 pretty decent players on the offensive line, ideally, who can start, and then we can kind of hopefully fill in the gaps with the rest. Then we move to the 2nd round. We go, I think, defensive tackle there. I don't know if you're going to get kind of one of the top 6 guys there, because that, again, it kind of runs out. There's a bit of I don't want to say a cliff, but there's a bit of a level there where you're going to lose some talent. But I think that's okay. I think this is a pretty deep defensive tackle draft. A guy that I've seen available in a lot of mock drafts in that kind of beginning of the second round is Draymond Jones from Ohio State, who was a really good player for them. He played a lot of snaps for them. A professional, I don't want to say a professional guy, obviously he was an amateur, but he's, well balanced, good against the run, good against the pass, had some good moves, willing to kind of stay in there and still provide some good pass rush pressure. So I think that's good. But there's other guys, Kiki from Texas A&M, Kingsley Kiki, Gerald Willis III, a guy who's a little bit older, but still has some, he's 23. But a guy who can rush the passer when needed. So I think there's still some value there in the second round you can work with if you don't get Dexter, one of the guys from Clemson or Alabama who are like 3 out of the top 4 guys. Also, Jerry Tillery from Notre Dame. He's a guy who's, when he's played really hard, has been unblockable at times. But he hasn't always played hard. And the question is, maybe if you can motivate him with a paycheck, maybe that'll help. But obviously, that's kind of one of those some defensive tackles just like to get paychecks and walk away. And then the other thing I would say is then you go third round. I think that's when you start looking. For me, it's at wide receiver. You could certainly make a case for tight end. I think at that point, your tight end value is probably not as good. I looked at the NFL scouts that they have working for like NFL.com. They do their grading, and so there's like, if you've got a grade between I think it's 5 and 6, then you got a chance at becoming a quality starter. And there's basically I think they had it as 12 guys who were defensive tackles who were rated higher than 5.5. There were at least 25 wide receivers who were better than 5.5. So I think you're much more likely to have a quality wide receiver that you can get in the third round who can come in and give you something that's going to add something to the team, rather than a tight end who's going to probably be battling with Croft for time on the field. I think, we've certainly added people at wide receiver with Beasley and Josh Brown. Zay Jones is obviously still coming back, but I don't think that either one of those, Zay Jones, I don't know, he's got 2 years left on his deal.
2 years left on his deal. Yep.
And obviously he's gotten better last season. I think that's clear, but I also don't think that he's a game breaking type. Same with Brown or Beasley. So I think there's room to get one more there. But if you wanted to go tight end, there's guys. I was looking at a mock draft today that said Irv Smith from Alabama. Again, a bit of a project, a guy who's going to need some time. Hasn't been playing a position for that long, I think. But there's going to be. You could go there. You could go corner there if you want somebody who you want to complete with. Levi Wallace, but your third round, obviously, you're not going to get as much talent frequently. But I go wide receiver there.
Awesome.
And I did try and interject a cough Marcel Darius when you're talking about lazy defensive tackles, but I was on mute, so I'm getting that interjection in now.
Albert Hainsworth came to my mind that once he got paid, he also got switched out of the position he was told he was going to play, but
he did. He got Shanahan, though. He still lazied himself, but yeah,
he did. Right? Just try, you jerk. Yeah, big jerk. This sort of, I'm going to read the Facebook comment now because we only have the one and it jibes with a lot of what Scott said. It's from Steven, who may feature later in the 2016 recap.
He'll also feature in the Twitter comments because he was our only Twitter comment.
Well, there you go. Steven's excited we have one listener and we got a like from Sean and one other person who I am too lazy to click to see who it was. But Steven says most of the Bills' free agent activity seemed to be on the offense, making me think they may be targeting defense on Thursday. And I agree with that. Was actually something I was going to say in a second. So I'm happy to have Steven say it for me. I'm fine with that. There's a lot of defensive talent at the top this year. My only concern is if there is a run on the defensive players before it gets to 9, he wants them to go to O-line. As Scott points out, most reports have said receivers are deep, so later rounds, as Scott just said, and tight ends generally don't merit a pick that high. I'm not opposed to trading down either, which brings me back to Paul, who said, trade up to get your guy if you want him. It's funny because with the depth of this class, I was sort of in the position well, if you figure Kyler Murray's going first, then you only have to there's only 8 position players you have to think about. And so for me, this is a good opportunity to trade down or stay put. I don't think we need to be moving up in necessarily the first round, but your secondary idea of moving up, like the idea of the future seeding draft picks, that had great appeal to me, because I fully agree with you that if you're sort of have a lot of players already and you don't need these guys who are going to be workout warrior camp guys in the 6th and 7th round, and somebody wants them and you can get 4th or 5th rounders out of it, that sounds like a good value to me. I don't know, like I know that tight end's not supposed to be drafted that high. I've been very intrigued by TJ Hawkinson. I know I remember many years ago I wanted Brandon Pettigrew, and it's, I don't know, was he a good pick? No. Was he a better tight end than the Bills had? Probably for a while. Yeah. So
I read today the Bills have not had a tight end finish in the top 10 in receptions in 18 years.
right.
I didn't look up who, but I assume it would be Reamersma back in
Yeah.
01.
I'm looking at this NFL draft. The other thing with the trading up and down, I'm looking at the NFL mock draft, which has Denver taking a quarterback and the Bengals taking a quarterback right after the Bills, which is even more reason to trade down, because one of those guys might want to move up and get it. And if if quarterbacks are going off the board, that's really not affecting you for once with the Bills. Yeah, I am. They did all the spending they did were things they needed to do in free agency, and they've created a lot of depth, if no stars. I think that it's one of these spots where they almost, obviously they can go wrong, but with regards to which choice they make, if they go defensive tackle, offensive line, or even offensive skill player like wide receiver, tight end, maybe that's the part where everybody goes, okay, he better be special. But defensive tackle and offensive line, certainly talent needed, talent available, and so hopefully they make a nice boring pick in that regard. Let's talk, or why don't you give us Steven's Twitter comments and see?
Sure, and this is good because we're not going to really discuss anything about other teams or what division's doing or anything this year during this podcast. But Steven brings up most, and then he puts all mock drafts are projecting the Cardinals will take a QB at 1, which a lot of people said is Murray. Great for Bills, but why in the world are they giving up on Rosen after 1 year? Steven, I'm in the same boat as you. Like, he didn't play. Yes, he played worse than the other 3 rookies last year, but not that much worse. And he had even less talent. He has arguably less talent around him than Allen did. Though again, arguable. I won't say that's a fact. But yeah, if the Cardinals do that, they're essentially going to reset their rebuild process. And that's saying that Josh Rosen proved you after year 1 that he's not the guy. So I don't know why in the world they would do it and give up on him so quickly. I don't know if you guys had any thoughts on that.
Would you say that you don't know what they're doing and you think it's kind of crazy?
Yes, I would definitely say that.
Okay, that's great, because that's exactly what you said in 2016 to Steven's question about why the Rams and the Eagles traded up to picks 1 and 2 to get quarterbacks.
Whoa.
And they ended up with lousy quarterbacks, right? Someone Jerode Goff, I think maybe was one of them, and Kerson Vince. It might be a German name. I'd have to look them up.
It's too delicious. I can't wait till later. Literally.
Yeah, and that's why, Steven, that's why in the world you would do that, because occasionally you get a franchise guy.
Paul quote, are the Rams insane? Why are they going up to get a quarterback when they could keep the defense okay? Similar thoughts on Philly. And Stephen and Paul, are the Eagles insane? And the answer is yes. Paul wants to play the odds. Paul's answer was, you need to play it safe. You got some good defense. Why are you chasing a quarterback? Like, maybe it'll hit, but most likely it won't, and maybe if you play it safe and you stay down there, you can get a guy like Ronald Darby. That was literally what you said. To your credit, I mean, Scott wasn't far off and I wasn't far off either. Scott and I took less more tempered versions of that, saying,
Right.
in one case, I said, especially with the Eagles at the time, had
Nick
had
Foles,
right?
who, by the way,
no, they had Sam Darnold, and
oh,
they had just
they had
given him
Sam Bradford,
tons of
Sam
money.
Bradford, the other
Sam
Sam.
Bradford, right? Yes, they had given him tons of money.
freshman Sam Darnold, yes.
Right. And so they had given him tons of money, and what were they thinking? And my LA answer was, well, you're newly in Los Angeles and you have to sell a little hope, and so you might as well get a quarterback, and if it doesn't work out, well, you're really no worse off than when you started. And so and Scott sort of was like, yeah, like I get what you're saying, but like also like, could you ever really, like, if you get a quarterback, it works. And so the counter to your answer, I guess, Stephen, is precisely the 2016 draft, in that, now look, Jared Goff didn't exactly light it up his first year at all. And perhaps a new coach would, and then a new coach came in and used him properly, so to speak. But
and actually, very specifically, that is kind of what happened in Arizona this year. Is that
exactly,
they hired Kingsbury, and apparently Kingsbury is not a fan of Rosen and is very much a fan of Kyler Murray, and so he is now the new regime, and therefore the old regime's choices have no merit on his.
Right, but Goff was a guy who was kept, right, and he went from.
So Goff was drafted under the old regime, and then
the new regime got a hold of him and said,
kept him.
he's all right. Yeah.
Like, wait, this is, if I just call the plays for him, then everything, tell him where to throw it. It's actually, this works fine.
Right. Also in that conversation was talking about what a great number 3 receiver Robert Woods could be, which is fantastic, because we were talking about how, like, he's not really suited for the number 2 role, and we have Sammy and Woods, and we just need a guy in the middle, and there's Jared Goff throwing him tons and
back when we had wide receivers.
So I say this only as Cassandra, right?
Future, but unable to do anything about it.
Exactly. So maybe Steven and to a lesser extent Paul, but mostly Steven, because he's not actually on the show, so we can just be mean to him. Next time you want to be like, what the hell are they doing? Well, maybe they're going to be in a Super Bowl in 3 years. I don't know.
My one defense will be they won the Eagles won the Super Bowl with Foles. That is my defense to dissing the fact that the last 2 NFC champions did the opposite of what I said they should do.
Entirely fair. Yeah. So that was that, and we can talk more about the past later. But that was too delicious to have Steven asking you the question, literally almost to the word, that was asked 3 years ago. Okay, so
we could talk about the past. No, yeah, I had to repost the agenda, by the way, and I caused chaos doing that. But this
I wasn't looking, so that's good.
Yeah, this was going to be my. This is normally when we transition to the. How does the 2016 draft? How does the draft from 3 years ago look today? And you guys are welcome to disagree, but this is an F, right? It's Shaq Lawson has been decent, but nowhere up to his draft billing, and no one else is on the Bills roster, and very few of them are even contributing in the NFL.
So I will. Scott, why don't you give your thoughts first, since my thoughts will be invariably tainted by the review of the podcasts.
Do you mean my thoughts on the 2016 draft?
Yes.
Reggie Ragland was 2. I didn't list all the picks because they don't really. Kevon Seymour was in there. It was a pretty crap draft. Cardale Jones,
Kevon Seymour, classic late cornerback that makes starts, right?
Yeah, I feel like a little bit. Then this was the draft that probably was torpedoed as much by the changing of the guard to a certain extent. And I don't want to say that completely, because obviously, like, it's not clear if a lot of these guys would have stuck around long term. Anyway, you could never really know.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, picking Ragland, like, he's gone on to do fine in Kansas City for the most part. Like, it's not like he's
starting.
He's starting. I mean, Kevon Seymour, like, he was perfectly good as a nickel corner, and I'm sure if he's a depth guy somewhere, I wouldn't be too surprised by that. Or he could be a depth guy, or at least he would be.
Yeah, I think he didn't play last year, but he was on the Panthers roster in 2017. The Bills would trade him for Kalen Clay, and he played. He started 3 games for the Panthers, made 22 tackles, and defended 3 passes. So not not going to blow you away, but you could do worse.
And Lawson was a
seventh round.
guy who fits a little better in this scheme than he did in the previous scheme that I think
that he was drafted for.
Right. Yeah,
Right.
the 2 schemes ago that
Mhm.
in the interregnum he did not really quite fare as well. I think that's something that happens to a lot of guys. So I mean, I think it was a draft where the short-sightedness, I don't want to say the short-sightedness, but the lack of consistent leadership really set the entire class back, and I think it's tough to kind of grade those guys in the abstract without knowing how it could have turned out otherwise. Like Adolphus Washington, another guy. He gave us some quality snaps over the course of the last couple of years. Like,
Mhm.
it wasn't a guy that, if you want a guy who was like designed to be a 3 technique tackle penetrator, that was really Adolphus Washington. Like, he was actually pretty decent at that. He wasn't great at the run. He was okay at the pass. So
Okay. Well, let me take you back to 2016 because I listened to the end of season 4 and the first episode of season 5 to get some of our thoughts on the free agency and the draft preview. To remind you, going into the 2016 NFL draft, the Bills were coming off a surprisingly good first season under Rex Ryan. We had Tyrod Taylor with EJ Manuel backing him up. We had had a surprisingly good offense or point scoring offense that with a sort of disappointing defense. The offense still struggled, though. There were issues with regards to 3 and outs. We were way high on the list for 3 and outs, but we were still sort of putting up more points than you would have thought with Rex Ryan, and we were drafting 19th overall. So
a little known band known as BTS began first recording sounds in South Korea.
Yes.
The U.S. presidential election began to heat up as it approached November. Whatever.
Exactly. No, there were some talk about whether it was an issue at the end of the podcast that Rex Ryan had spoken on behalf of or introduced Donald Trump in Buffalo. That was one of the episodes. Prince had just died because I had done a Prince intro. There was some other, so it was a weird, wild time. I believe one of our off-air discussions involved that there was no worry that a certain famous individual hadn't bought the Bills because he wasn't destined to go on to greater things. And we'll let you guess it.
History has not treated that discussion well. That's even worse than my Wentz golf take.
No, here's the thing, and I'm going to defend 2016 Paul and Scott against 2019 Paul and Scott. Scott wanted an offensive lineman. He wanted Jack Conklin or Taylor Decker, both of whom are still offensive linemen, not all pros or even Pro Bowlers, but they're offensive linemen. There was a lot of rumors about the Bills maybe trading up to 2 with the Browns, but obviously that went to the Eagles. Paul said Whaley's going to be looking to fill depth and not get a superstar, but likely stay put or not trade down. Frank said, I can't remember when the last time we didn't need an offensive lineman was. And I feel like that has been a constant refrain even over the last 3 years. We had lots of great talks about whether Miller was going to survive or Cordy Glenn was going to continue his, then we got to Paul's and Stevens are the Rams and saying, experts were saying the Bills are going to take a defensive lineman, including names like Shaq Lawson or possibly Reggie Ragland in the first round. Paul picked Shaq Lawson. Paul said, I'm going with Shaq Lawson because his name is Shaq, and Shaqs have a good history in sports. Scott liked Shaq Lawson fine. Scott also said if guys like Laramie Tunsil and Joey Bosa don't fall, then Shaq Lawson, Sheldon Rankins, and Dichi, who I still struggle to say his name, Kevin Dodd, Ragland was okay, Jalen Smith was okay. I went with Mackenzie Alexander, who is a cornerback, largely because I thought, well, that would be the weirdest Bills thing to do. It would be to take a corner you don't really need. And then we had a good discussion about when to take a quarterback because we all felt we needed a new backup quarterback. The consensus was the 3rd round or later was okay. The second round was iffy. And the first round was off limits. We no taking a first round quarterback this year because we had Tyrod Taylor. And we felt like, he might progress further, but nobody was comfortable with EJ Manuel as the backup. So with all that in mind, the Bills take amazingly, the Bills go that the other thing that was said a couple times was everybody had confidence that Rex Ryan could take lesser defensive players and put them in a system and get it to work. So with that in mind, you take Shaq Lawson, you trade back up a little to get Reggie Ragland, you almost get Miles Jack, Adolphus Washington, Cardell Jones goes in the 4th round, Jonathan Williams, Colby Listenby, and Kevon Seymour. And to quote Scott, did we paraphrasing? You chose to paraphrase Stephen Colbert in saying great draft or greatest draft. And Paul said it's a great draft, and he was mad because he wanted to rag on this draft, but he felt like they couldn't. That all the choices they made in the moment were good, and you weren't necessarily saying like they couldn't be, that there weren't better players, but you were pretty much saying like all these things fit at needs, and they more or less, were not out of sync with value. And Scott agreed, and I agreed. I said it was a very good draft. You guys kind of said it was it was a very good draft. Using the phrase "great," and all of our commenters wrote in saying that was pretty good, and everyone was excited about Cardell Jones and would he. One of the questions you asked was, what was the percentage chance of Cardell Jones being a starter in week 1 or starting a game in that year in 2016? Paul had 15%, and that talked me from 3% to 6%. I basically said there was no chance. And we had a good conversation about how if he had come out the year before, he would have been a 2nd-round pick, and the story about him not knowing the laces would help you with accuracy came out. And I think you're right, Paul, that none of these players turned out to be very good. But I think if you look at the draft as a whole and you look at all the people taken after Shaq Lawson, there just aren't many great players.
Yeah. I was looking at the quarterbacks too, and we were talking about that after the 3rd round. Yeah, Dak Prescott got taken 4 picks before Cardell Jones, but literally after Goff and Wentz at 1-2, you have Lynch, Hackenberg, Jacoby Brissett, Cody Kessler, Connor Cook, Kevin Hogan, Nate Sudfeld, Jake Rudock, Brandon Allen, Jeff Driscoll, and Brandon Doughty. There was nothing. Yeah.
Well, that was the funny thing because the radio that week was complaining that they had passed on Paxton Lynch, and was that going to be a mistake? And like, obviously it wasn't. It was like he was beyond terrible. And if you look at the top of the draft, right, Goff and Wentz were the gambles, and they paid off. And then Bosa, Ezekiel Elliott, Jalen Ramsey were all the players that they were meant to be. And other than that, I don't know. Like Keanu Neal's a nice player.
Michael Thomas went to the Pro Bowl for the Saints. There's some good to be right.
And how much of Michael Thomas's success is Drew Brees, right?
Yeah.
Deion Jones, Cody
Whitehair.
Yeah.
Drafted by the Jets.
I mean,
Jalen Smith was going to be injured for that season, but everyone knew that he was basically a 1st-round draft pick who tore his ACL in the championship game, and so he was pretty good for Dallas last year until the end. Like, so, I mean, it's like everything else, it got thinner as the game went on.
Right. Dak Prescott, Tyreek Hill, like these are names that are later in the draft that clearly we'd all like to have, but it's not as if anybody knew that they were good. Right.
You didn't take Christian Hackenberg, so that's a win.
Right. Right. So Dak Prescott was 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5 picks before Cardell Jones. So he wasn't even available at that point. So, I think that it's a good lesson in obviously the reason we do this in part is because you can't even know what a draft is until you're done. So keep that in mind next week when we pick apart the draft.
When we don't learn from our lessons, specifically me, and I critique something that proves. And watch,
we have all said terribly stupid things. It's just you were totally on point, and you weren't even like that wrong, because if instead of
heck, even after 1 year, if you looked at Goff, you'd be like, oh boy, the Rams really did blow it.
Yeah, they shit the bed there, right? Yeah. But like Paxton Lynch was in that discussion, and if you go to like 2015 or 2017, like the number of times it doesn't work, is up there too. Who was taken in 2015? Jameis Winston, right? Jameis Winston made a Pro Bowl, but is he a good quarterback? No.
He lost a starting job to Ryan Fitzpatrick. That is the sign that your career has ended, at least unofficially.
Right. Myles Garrett, Mitchell Trubisky. Okay, Trubisky looks like he might be okay, but we've only got a year or two on him, really. So, and Carson Wentz, injured twice. Like, and if it wasn't for the fact that, Nick Foles played out of his mind, what do the Eagles look like, right? Like Carson Wentz certainly played well, but he's also missed parts of 2 seasons. And so,
and there's rumors that his back issues could be chronic, and that might be a problem. We follow a couple Eagles fans on Twitter, and they were noting that, and I thought, maybe maybe we won't look as dumb down the road. And by we, I mean me.
Briefly going back to the point from earlier, like it is bigger than just the people you draft too. Like if we draft a bunch of guys and then the team craps the bed this year for a variety of reasons that may or may not have anything to do with who we drafted, we bring an entirely new coaching staff next year, and all these guys are now playing out of position or playing in a system they weren't drafted for, then none of them are going to have a great start to their careers because they're not doing what they were intended to do. So it's bigger than just what we think on any given day.
Also, I'd like to point out the Browns were lauded widely for trading out of the number 2 spot. They took Corey Coleman in the first round with the 15th pick that they got from Los Angeles via Tennessee, and the Titans had gone back up to get Jack Conklin. So look, it's all a terrible, terrible nightmare. What can I say? So that was your trip through 2016.
Yeah, Eli Apple was gone by that point. Yeah, it's an interesting draft. So, I give it an F, but you know what? I should probably, if I had the time and the motivation to do so, I would look at all the teams, grade it down a bell curve, and see where the Bills really are. Because, you obviously want to give some A's to teams like the Rams and Eagles that got seemingly franchise quarterbacks, and the Chargers getting Joey Bosa. But then I've got to look at every round and see how they did with their depth picks.
Yeah, I think you got to look at it too, like who was.
And like Scott's had team success. If the team craps the bed one year, how good a pick is it been? So
Falcons drafted 3 Pro Bowlers that year: Keanu Neal, Deion Jones, and Austin Hooper.
I believe the
statistics, and yet they've been more terrible than ever since they went to the Super Bowl.
Right.
But, I believe the statistics tell you that literally no coaching staff is better at drafting players than any other coaching staff. They all literally, no matter the franchise, no matter the staff, everyone has roughly the same success rate based on the level, the order in which they're picking. So obviously a first rounder is more likely to make the league than a 7th rounder. And so literally, and that's why people always say like the Patriots to a certain extent have the best plan, which is just get the most picks and then worry about everything afterwards, because you may not hit on these guys, but at least if you take enough rolls of the dice, your odds are you're going to get more of them.
The Browns, speaking of, had 14 picks that year. They made 14 picks. They didn't trade, like after all their trades, they made 14 picks, and Joe Schobert was the only one that went to a Pro Bowl.
Well, they did win a game that year, so it didn't work out. They didn't work out so well in 2017, but 2016 they did win that one game. So
I think we're going to talk about the Browns more in a little bit here. So.
I think it's fair to say that no team is better, but I think some teams are worse. So anyway, yeah, I mean, I think that, vindicated, no, like totally wrong, a little, but like at the time, much like the Bills, what better choice did we have than to say the things we did?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's enough of 2016. What do we want to, where are we? Where's
schedule? Yeah. So like I said, I repasted the schedule, the agenda, and botched it all up. So scroll to the bottom and then scroll up, and there's schedule thoughts.
Try and find that out. Easiest one ever. This will be a 30-second segment where we all grade them an F. Oh, okay, that was it. Okay. What's that note? Okay. Okay, yeah. So the schedule is up. The Bills start on the road in New Jersey. They stick around, and then
they continue on the road in New Jersey.
Yeah. Right. They get both of their Meadowland games out of the way before coming home to face Cincinnati and New England. So Jets, Giants, Bengals, New England. Then they are on the road to Tennessee before they take the 6th week off. They are home against the Dolphins, the Eagles, and they are home against Washington. So a big stretch of
3 straight home games. Yep,
three
right
straight home
after the
games.
bye.
Right. And then November is on the road in Cleveland, on the road in Miami. Good time to be in Miami in November.
Yep.
Then they are home against Denver. They are a Thanksgiving 4:30 game against the Dallas Cowboys. So there's that. Then Baltimore at home in December, Pittsburgh on the road, New England on the road, Jets at home to finish it. So it's nice if you're a local to Buffalo. A lot of times the complaint is 3 December home games for a bad football team. You're only getting 2. The Saturday New England game will be oh no, that's the one that's flexible, right? It's Saturday.
Right, it's gonna be Saturday or Sunday, or in time to be determined. So they'll figure that out closer to. It depends on how good the Bills are, essentially.
Right. If they could put it down at 3 in the morning, I'm sure they would. But yeah. So that's the schedule. The Bills obviously playing the NFC East and the AFC South.
AFC North.
Right, North. Yes.
Which I was slightly I looked at how those games are scheduled. It looks like we're only going to get maybe 3 local games out of this, depending on how they do ball. Well, no, they'll get 4. The Dallas game obviously is going to be the national game that week. You're going to have Baltimore. You're going to have Washington.
National game.
What's that?
No primetime games.
Yeah, no prime. Everything's 1 p.m.
That's the only national game is the Thanksgiving game.
That must count as a primetime game then, because everybody's guaranteed at least one. So so you'll get the Baltimore game, the Washington game, and the Dallas game.
And I looked the way Pittsburgh is scheduled that week. Baltimore has a Saturday game, and so if Pittsburgh's in and Baltimore's competing with Pittsburgh, I would think the Bills would be the local game, but we shall see.
So at least 3, maybe 4 for us, and anybody else who's listening in the Washington D.C. area. Like Reza, right? He's a little around here.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's the schedule. Thoughts? I mean, to me, it's a schedule. It certainly has 16 games on it. I like that we're done December 26th.
I like that. I think without going too far into it in terms of like wins and losses, I think we will know a lot. I feel like in previous years, you won't know anything about the team until like week 5 or 6. I think we're going to know a lot about this team by week 4. That'll be because at the same time as like we will have played on the road against the Jets and Giants, which are not, they're road games against bad teams, which a good team should win, but a bad team could lose. We will also have home versus New England. And if we have any shot of being good this year, that's a game that we should know about. And plus a home game against Cincinnati, which can be a taste too. So I think within those first 4 weeks, we will know a lot about this team. Whereas I feel like in previous years, we'll have 4 like ridiculously tough games where we won't know anything about the team because we didn't know like, what this team was after 4 games last year with the Ravens debacle and the weird Vikings game where we beat them by 30 and everyone thinks they're the greatest team ever. And, other years when we played 4 cupcakes in a row and then we lose one and we're like, I don't know what this team is. I think we'll know a lot more this year.
Yeah, I'm a little more cowardly than Scott. I've got to double it. I need 8 games. I want to see what happens after that 3-game stretch of home games goes. They should go 2-1 in that stretch. They could go 3-0 depending on how much Philadelphia has improved and how much if they've fallen down a bit or if how much Buffalo has improved. If you after 8 games are looking at that, a 5-3 or even a 6-2 team, I'll be optimistic. If it's anything 4-4 or less going into the back half of the schedule when you've got 3 road games in 4 weeks and then you've got back-to-back road games in Pittsburgh and New England in December, I think it's just going to be a very tall order. But I really expect after that halfway point of the season, we're going to know a lot. And I do. Yeah, I like the fact 25 years it's been since the Thanksgiving Day game. So I'll get to enjoy that whether I'm, no matter where I'm traveling for Thanksgiving. And yeah, all in all, I'm surprised by the lack of a primetime game, a true primetime game. But, what have the Bills done to really earn it in the last 19 years? 1 playoff appearance, 6 wins last year. We have more of a high opinion of the team, I suppose. But, they haven't proven anything yet. So you get what they give you.
You're not going to get a Buffalo bonus, certainly. You're not going to get, we got to get that Buffalo market
right
on that national stage. I think we're going to, I think at Tennessee, week 5, home versus Philly, week 8, and then at home versus Baltimore. I think those are the 3 big toss-up games.
Yep.
I think if you win those 3, you got a good shot at the playoffs. I think if you get 1 or 2 of them, you're on thin ice. I think it's going to get tight.
Is it too early to have that conversation about whether that's necessary this year, or like is that a deal breaker now? Is 9-7 without the
we talked about this a little bit last time, I remember, and I would be, and I mentioned I would be more disappointed if they didn't make the playoffs this season.
I don't know that I think the goal is to make the playoffs. If they finish 9-7 and don't make the playoffs because of some tiebreaker, like I'm not going to freak out. But if they're 7-9, and Allen, I mean, it's also partly how it looks. If it's Allen taking a step back or not growing, then we have a problem. If Allen looks great and the defense collapses for some reason or there's a bunch of injuries, I'm not going to be as concerned about 7 or 9 or 6-10.
Okay, maybe that'll be a question about like, okay, coaching's the issue now, right? Like we've got talented players, but for some reason this defensive coach isn't getting the defense taken care of.
Right.
But we
I
can
just want to
discuss
see.
that with the outlooks.
Right. I want to see McDermott do well this year, and then do extremely well the 4th year, and that's because no Bills completed 4 years of coaching since Marv Levy. So
Yeah,
that's
and
really my long-term goal.
I'm thinking he'll get the benefit of the doubt because the Pagula's already having to go through another hockey coach.
Yep.
So any chance he can hold on to Scott McDermott or Sean McDermott, damn it, and Brandon Bean, he will.
Brandon McBean.
Brandon McBean, yes. Scott McDermott. I'm watching a completely different show than the rest of it.
I think Scott, by the way, is dead on the Josh Allen point. Like, yeah, if they don't make playoffs, but Allen looks like the real deal after 2 years, which is tougher than showing potential after 1 year, then I think there's going to be some happiness in Bills land.
Very good. TJ Yeldon, they have the oldest and the youngest running back available now. Quentin Spain and EJ Gaines makes his triumphant return to Buffalo. Thoughts on this? I'll start. I think Yeldon spells the end of LaShawn McCoy. Honestly, I don't think you bring Frank Gore in to then cut him necessarily. I mean, you could, but I think that he's there for the pass blocking and Yeldon's there for the young legs. And now you're going to dress McCoy too. Like that seems like a lot of running backs to me. The other 2 guys, I don't know. Whatever. Thoughts, Scott? Thoughts?
Yeah, this one's tricky. Yeldon is a guy who's still got some legs on him.
Mm-hmm.
Never really been a guy who was a lead back. Always been a good potential back. So I could see them continuing to use him in that role. I do see that we could suit up 4 backs on game day, and Gore is kind of the all-purpose backup, and Yeldon is the number 2, and McCoy is number 1, something like that. I think it's good to bring him in to have a little bit. I'm a little surprised. I mean, some of them I'm surprised he's available because he's a guy who has some quality. He's an NFL player. He is a guy who has had success in the league and good enough to stick to a team. So I'm a little surprised he's available. I still like drafting a back. I think just my little sleeper plug is I don't know if he's going to be available in the 4th round. Big Bryce Love fan. Watched him a lot at Stanford. Great running back. He injured his ACL last year, 3 or 4 games in, and he could have come out as a junior and made a lot of money. He stayed for a senior year, got hurt, did not have a great season. It might have been 7 or 8 games in, but that's a guy who's going to be there hopefully in those later rounds, so we can bring in and really be a quality back. Yeldon's fine, and the other guys, again, another guy who, when I went to the Tennessee boards, they were like, "Yeah, I'm really glad we got this new guard from Los Angeles." That other guy, he was okay. Is a guy no one was upset to lose about. So I'm not particularly thrilled about Quentin. Spain or Span?
So, that's a good point. I've always said Spain, but I could be wrong. And by always said, I mean I've called him that in the 3 weeks I've heard.
I have no idea.
Red ships of Span.
Well, we'll do a YouTube video later and do it. Yeah, I'm with Scott on Yelm. I could see them doing three running backs and a fullback on game day, and giving McCoy a rest. So I don't think it necessarily spells the end of LaShawn McCoy. I certainly don't think it's definitive that it does. We will see though, and yeah, you take a flyer, and like Scott, I don't mind if they take another back in the draft. They think it's going to be worth their while, and then keep that guy on the roster, but inactive on game day. And then with the guards, yeah, I was much more excited about Quinton. Quinton Spain was one of those guys, or Span, who seemed to be highly rated on the free agent boards. But that said, Kelvin Benjamin was on free agent boards, and I don't think he's signed anywhere or anyone shown any interest in him. And the fact that the Bills got him late for a year and 1.75, either that's the deal of the century or he's just going to be another one of the guys we talked about earlier. EJ Gaines, if he plays like he did a couple of years ago and can stay on the field, would be great. But as we know, he's never stayed on the field. But between him and Kevin Johnson and Levi Wallace, if just one of those guys can step up to be a competent number two, and Tyron Johnson continues to develop as a good corner, I'm fine with the cornerback depth. I mentioned they brought in a couple of special teams guys too, probably not really worth mentioning, other than the fact that maybe we'll see them, if these guys make the roster, we'll see a special teams unit that can go from bottom to near the top, and we'll see how that affects the team's success overall.
Cool. Do you want to get to the joint? You mentioned there's a joint practice.
Yeah, there's a joint practice with Carolina. That's the bottom news. Why don't we just jump into this day in Bills?
I'm excited for this because I think we did a lot of good draft talk, and we'll be excited to talk next week. So let's get our favorite segment in before we get out of here.
All righty. All right, we'll start with, I've got 10 questions today, so about the norm. 2017, 3 reasons the Bills should draft Ole Miss quarterback blank.
Ole Miss 2017?
Yep, I wonder if
2017, Chad Kelly.
Chad Kelly, yes. Kelly. Boy, that's... I feel like I could have
dodging a bullet.
Yeah, I could have done a whole series of headlines called "Bills dodging bullets" for this day, but I decided against it. This one is a guy we've talked about on this pod, obviously. 2016, why Bills fans should embrace drafting blank. It is a quarterback, so that's going to give it away.
Cardale Jones.
Cardale Jones, yes, he was He was the one that they said, oh, he's going to be like EJ Manuel, but no, he's so much better than EJ. But no, he was not. They've both been cut by the teams they went to in the AFC West after Buffalo. All right, we're going to go back a bit. 7 years to 2012. All signs positive for blank. Blank was quoted as saying, the Achilles is such a unique injury. It's not one of those things where you look at it and it says, let's go fix it right now. But we reached a point where it was time to get it done. I was pleased with how the surgery went, and I feel great now.
I remember this because it was a weird timing on the surgery. I remember they were like, why didn't you do it?
2012?
It's a guy who started 6 games for Buffalo total. He'd started 5 in 2011, got the surgery, was cut before 2012, but then came back and played 10 games and started 1 in 2012. Some hints. This will be the biggest hint. He finished his career with 45.5 sacks, 2 of which were with Buffalo.
So defensive. End or tackle.
NFL league leader in sacks in 2006. He was also an All-Pro that year.
Jeez, come on.
Mario?
No, but at least you're on the defense. You're on the right side of the ball. That was a reasonable guess.
It's all those offensive linemen we have racking up sacks.
Yeah, so 2006 led the leagues in sacks. 2007 led the league with 19 tackles for a loss. Then some injuries started to happen. Then he went to Buffalo, and his career was pretty much dead. We do follow him on Twitter.
Sean Merriman.
Yeah. Twitter him was on the pod.
No, it was actually the fact I kept thinking that he was an original Bill for some reason, and once I realized he was done, then that helped. Okay.
Yeah. All right. This will be one you guys probably won't get, but the headline was just so great I couldn't ignore it. 2011, former Bills fullback blank facing asbestos charge. EPA investigators raided his firm's property on April 19th and found a significant amount of asbestos waste that had not been properly secured, labeled, or disposed of. And then I followed up, and 6 years later, he did plead guilty in 2017. He was a fullback in 1989, and he didn't really even, I don't think he saw any playing time in the regular season.
Larry Centers.
That you would have, if this guy wishes he were Larry Centers. I will give you
Booby Dixon.
Here's the only hint I will give, and then we'll move on. His last name is a very profitable occupation.
Banker. Sam Gash. No.
Banker was a good one there too. It is former Bills fullback Sean Doctor.
Oil Tycoon.
Oh, Oil Tycoon was a good guess
Sean
too.
Oil
Sean
Tycoon.
Doctor. Yep. 2010 Buffalo Bills draft playmaker blank.
2010.
Yep.
I don't think we had any playmakers on the team in the 2010.
No, this was. I remember being on the. I had finished up at the gym when I was working at one of the firms I was at in DC, and I waited until the Bills drafted. It took a while, and they got this guy, and I'm like, what?
Aaron Mabin.
No, let's say it's an offensive playmaker, and he was not an entire bust at all. He had one. He made it through his contract with the team, all 5 years of it. He did have one Pro Bowl season.
So not James Hardy.
Nope. He hit a very, I don't know, so I'll give it away if I give that hint. He left after his Buffalo career ended. He would play 13 games with New Orleans and then 7 total games between the Jets, Seahawks, and Kansas City.
Oh,
Josh Reed?
No.
Too late to that. It's wide receiver?
No.
Okay, well.
Tight end?
Someone who you're thinking, why would you draft this guy if you have
running back.
Marshawn Lynch and Fred Jackson on the roster?
CJ Spiller.
CJ Spiller. Yep.
Right.
Yes, that doesn't make sense.
Claudia Jean, as we used to call him.
Mm-hmm.
All right, 2005. I don't think you guys have a chance on this. It's more of a let's respect this guy because he was good while he was here. 2005, Bills re-signed cornerback blank. Blank was the Bills' 6th round draft pick in 2002. He played in all 16 of the team's games last season, registering 45 tackles, 1 sack, and no interceptions. I will note in 2005, he never played. He signed the contract. He re-upped in 2005, but never played a game in the NFL again. I did not research what happened after that. He was more of a nickelback player.
It wasn't Ashton Ubodi, was he?
No, but that's a good guess. You're in the right area. Except a much more common name.
Chris Watson?
Oh, that was good too. He was actually I think he was drafted by the Broncos originally. But yeah, he dropped off the face of the earth too.
Is it a Williams?
It's not a Williams, but it is another very common last name in Bills lore.
Kelly? No.
Keep going. You're on the right lines. You'll name the last name.
Smith or Thomas.
Thomas. There we go. Good job. It's Thomas. Kevin Thomas.
Thomas.
And his job was replaced by Milwaukee Thomas. I remember because it was so confusing when Frank and I were at the bar. And like, what's K Thomas? Oh yeah, Kevin Thomas. And then we're like, no, it's Milwaukee. And it took us half the season to realize Kevin Thomas had been cut. And the new K Thomas, who was playing nickel corner, was Milwaukee Thomas. All right. 2001, Bills signed quarterback blank, and then the under headline says, "Not that one. This quarterback blank from Boston College is from Boston College." Said the Bills and others called it always the 5th round, and Buffalo they might pick him with their 7th. He wasn't, but a deal was struck soon at the end of the draft. He is now an ESPN analyst along with his brother.
Marcel Wiley?
He has been married to a famous talk show host since 2002. One could say his wife is really a survivor.
What?
Not a Hasselbeck, is it?
Oh, yes, Tim Hasselbeck. Well done, Scott.
Okay.
Good job.
That's a guess. Was it Matt or Tim?
Tim.
Tim. Okay.
Yeah, because it says not that one, because at this time Matt was actually a competent NFL quarterback. Yeah.
Right. Okay. All right.
All right. 2000, you can get one of these two because these are tougher. Blank and blank joined Immortals on Bill's Wall of Fame. I will give you some quick background on the two. One was a 5-time AFL All-Pro who died in 2013. He made the Sporting News All-AFL team for 3 seasons, and he was the president of the Pro Football Writers Association, called him the finest open field tackler in the league. And the other player was the last active NFL player to be killed while serving as a soldier in a war.
Bob Kalsu?
Bob Kalsu. Good job, Scott. Yes, that was because Pat Tillman, who died, in 2004, he was retired at the time.
Yeah.
The other one, George Sames, who was, 10th all time the Bills interception list, and was second team for their 50th anniversary team. So just a shout out to George Sames. All right, 2 more to go. 1989. I know we're running thin because this guy was an answer last time. Bills pick wide receiver blank with their first pick, number 82 overall in round 3. So they had no first and second round picks this year. Don't jump all in at once. I know we're all anxious to answer this one. So wide receiver, 1989 was the team's first pick, 3rd round guy. Answered in last the Stay in Bills headlines.
Really?
Yep. You think of Reed, you think of Lofton, you think of, bless you.
Excuse me. Isabella the First of Castile.
The Castilian. Also known as Don Beebe.
Rasmus Dahlin, right.
Yeah. All right. 1 to go. Let's end on a high note.
Okay.
Do this. All right.
I'm gonna focus here.
Here we go. 31 years ago, Colts expected to sign quarterback blank. The Colts said they were also close to signing blank, a quarterback who has played 15 seasons in the NFL, mostly with the Buffalo Bills. General Manager Jim Irsay said all negotiations have been concluded. At this point, it's just the Colts waiting for an answer.
So this is 1988.
1988, he did in fact go on to sign with the Colts, where he ended his NFL career. Let me verify that before I do. Yes, he did go on to sign with the Colts. He played there. He played in 1990. It was his last season. He played 1 game. He went 2 for 8, and then he called it quits.
So quarterback, you said?
Quarterback. He'd spent a lot of years with the Bills.
So it's got to be Joe Ferguson. Well, I think was already okay. I was worried that he was already retired, and I was going to say Shane Matthews is the next one.
I mean, he was essentially already retired. He spent he'd played started 163 games with the Bills, played in 164 total, and over the last 5 seasons of his career, he played in not 8 games and just into a heck of a lot. But that was this day in Bills headlines, April 23rd.
Very good.
As a update, the Toronto Maple Leafs have been eliminated. It looks.
Oh, the Bruins won, huh?
It looks like they won. So 26 years and counting since a Canadian team has won the Stanley Cup.
USA.
Unless you're one of our Canadian listeners, in which case, boo. Unless you're a Canadian fan.
Well, yeah, if you're one of our Canadian listeners in Quebec, we're chanting États-Unis, États-Unis. If you are French Canadian and would like to get a hold of us,
bonjour.
Bonjour. Comment ça va? Ça va bien. bbillsmny@gmail.com, bbillsmny on Twitter, or you can find us anchor.fm/bbillsmny. You can search Buffalo Bills podcast, or maybe next year in the Google we come up, facebook.com/bbillsmny, and you'll find us. That's what all the places you can get a hold of us. This is the end of season 7. Season 8 starts very soon. Typically there is one big, it's like the Daytona 500 episode, where it's the big episode at the beginning of the year, and then we kind of chill out for a while, because the draft is over and we've got to wait for things to actually happen again. So we'll be excited to see what the Bills do. We'll be back next week with all of our wrong takes, or maybe they'll be right, who knows. But but we'll be back probably next week or soon after the draft to discuss all that. We hope you're doing well, and thank you again for listening. The several hundred of you that listen make us want to keep doing this. So thank you so much. Or not, or maybe I'll just snap my fingers and it'll all be over. Until then.
All right, fair point. All right, we'll keep with it, Frank. Fine.
And on a dark note, good.
Right. Well, I don't know. I mean, maybe we'll talk about Avengers Endgame next time. I doubt it because I
understand. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Until next time. My name is Frank.
Scott.
Je m'appelle Paul.
Bonsoir.